The Looming Shadow of Conflict, analyzing the U.S. Senate's rejection of the Venezuela War Powers Resolution, potential timelines for escalation, implications for Colombia, and the distorting lens of Latin American media.
Introduction. On November 6, 2025, the United States Senate voted 51-49 to reject S.J.Res. 90, a bipartisan war powers resolution aimed at mandating congressional approval for military actions against Venezuela. This narrow defeat, driven by Republican majorities, has fueled perceptions of unchecked executive power under President Donald Trump, despite administration assurances that no immediate strikes on Venezuelan soil are planned. The context involves escalating U.S. operations since September 2025, including over a dozen airstrikes on suspected drug vessels in the Caribbean and Pacific, resulting in at least 69 deaths, some Colombian, and the positioning of naval assets like the USS Gerald R. Ford carrier group near Venezuelan waters.
This rewritten essay expands on prior analysis by integrating a critical examination of Latin American news media's role in distorting coverage of the crisis. While the Senate's decision amplifies risks of unilateral U.S. action, regional media, plagued by polarization, ownership biases, and state control, often amplifies narratives that either demonize Maduro without nuance or whitewash U.S. aggression, exacerbating misinformation and hindering diplomatic resolutions. Drawing on historical parallels like the 1989 U.S. invasion of Panama and the 2019 Venezuelan election disputes, this piece assesses escalation timelines, Colombia's vulnerabilities, media distortions with concrete examples, and U.S. policy critiques. It concludes with recommendations emphasizing multilateralism and media accountability to prevent a broader regional quagmire.
Background on U.S.-Venezuela tensions. The standoff traces roots to U.S. sanctions since 2017, intensified under Trump's second term as a drug war against Maduro's alleged narco ties. CIA covert operations, authorized in October 2025, and Trump's labeling of Maduro as a terrorist have provoked Venezuelan mobilizations, including Russian S-400 air defenses. Venezuela's military, eroded by sanctions and defections, could falter rapidly in a U.S.-led campaign, per think tank assessments. Opposition leader Maria Corina Machado's meetings with Trump have split Venezuelan exiles, with some endorsing intervention despite warnings of chaos. X, formerly Twitter, discourse reveals fractures. Pro-opposition posts celebrate U.S. pressure, while critics decry imperialism. A declassified Pentagon report, circulating online, cautions of post-Maduro anarchy, including FARC resurgence spilling into Colombia. Echoing past interventions, like the CIA's 1973 Chile coup, economic motives loom large, with Venezuela's oil reserves eyed amid U.S. efforts to counter Chinese influence.
The Senate vote and its implications. Defeating the resolution invokes the 1973 War Powers Resolution's ambiguities, allowing 60-day actions without approval. Senator Ed Markey lambasted it as enabling forever wars, amid polls showing 72% U.S. opposition to Venezuelan involvement. Trump's strategic ambiguity, bluster paired with restraint, mirrors his 2019 threats, but recent Pacific strikes signal momentum. X users highlight GOP media allies like Fox News, framing it as necessary deterrence, glossing over civilian casualties. Potential timeline for escalation. Timelines remain fluid, contingent on triggers like Venezuelan reprisals or Maduro's collapse. Short-term, 2 to 8 weeks miscalculations, such as a naval incident, could prompt limited airstrikes by December 2025, leveraging prepositioned F-35s. Medium-term, 2 to 6 months hybrid tactics, sanctions, cyber ops, opposition arming may evolve into blockades if diplomacy falters, per Institute Montaigne scenarios. Long-term, 6 months Russian or Iranian escalations could internationalize, though U.S. domestic fatigue, e.g., shutdown distractions, may cap intensity. Analysts peg imminent risks for Q1 2026, with Trump's days are numbered, rhetoric underscoring coercive intent.
Impacts on Colombia. Bordering Venezuela over 1,400 miles, Colombia absorbs 2.8 million refugees and contends with ELN guerrillas exploiting the porosity. War could unleash 3 to 5 million more displacements, overwhelming camps in Norte de Santander and echoing Syria-Turkey flows. U.S. strikes already killed Colombians, straining Petro's administration, which condemns them as executions. Security risks include ELN retaliation and coca surges if U.S. pressures halt fumigations. Economically, halted $1.2 billion trade and oil flows could inflate prices, though coffee exports might benefit temporarily. Diplomatically, Petro's balancing, U.S. ally yet Maduro mediator, phrase, with Bogotá protests decrying Yankee imperialism. Historical analogies abound. Colombia's 1990s guerrilla wars intensified via cross-border spillovers, much like potential FARC revivals post-Maduro. The distorting lens, critique of Latin American news media coverage. Latin American media, fragmented by oligarchic ownership, state censorship, and ideological silos, profoundly distorts the Venezuela crisis, often prioritizing sensationalism over context. This mediatic golpismo, media kumongering, a term from regional discourse, manufactures consent for external interventions or domestic repression, polarizing publics and eroding trust. A 2025 OAS report documents Venezuela's ecosistema mediatico deterioration, with 47% of outlets shuttered since 2017, fostering echo chambers. Polarization, as analyzed in Nueva Sociedad, pits pro-government broadcasters against private conglomerates, mirroring broader hemispheric divides where U.S.-aligned media amplify regime change narratives, while Chavismo allies peddle victimhood.
Example 1. Venezuelan state media's whitewashing of internal crises. State outlets like Venezolana de Televisión, VTV, and Telesur exemplify distortion by framing U.S. actions as unprovoked imperial aggression, omitting Maduro's narco indictments or 2024 election fraud claims upheld by 73% in a November 2025 Infobi poll. A July 2024 Cuba debate exposé, echoed in 2025 coverage, accused golpismo comunicacional of Western manipulation but inverted it, ignoring domestic repression like the 2024 post-election arrests of 2,000+ dissidents. This creates a siege mentality, boosting Maduro's 35% approval while suppressing refugee testimonies, as Human Rights Watch noted in January 2025. Example 2. Colombian private media's anti-Maduro xenophobia. In Colombia, conglomerates like RCN and Caracol, tied to conservative elites, exaggerate Venezuelan invasions, fueling refugee backlash despite Petro's integration policies. A October 2025 Al Jazeera report highlighted how coverage of ELN U.S. drug threats ignored Colombian complicity in border trafficking, instead sensationalizing Maduro's hordes in hit pieces on activist shootings. This bias, critiqued in X threads as manufactured fear, spiked anti-migrant violence 22% in border provinces, per Crisis 24 data, distorting public support for U.S. intervention from 28% to perceived majorities. Example 3. Regional echo chambers and disinformation cascades. Brazilian and Argentine media under right-wing influences, e.g., O Globo, Clarín, propagate evolution of lies about Venezuela, as detailed in an X-post cataloging shifts from Chavez wasn't so bad to Maduro as narco-ISIS equivalent. ASCLO study on Golpes Mediáticos cites 2025 examples where Globo downplayed U.S. carrier deployments as defensive, aligning with Bolsonaro-era anti-leftism, while ignoring regional fallout like Brazilian soy trade disruptions. In Mexico, televisors pro-US tilt amidst CIA history in Latin coups, per Caracas Chronicles October 2025 critique of foreign misreporting. These distortions, amplified on X, e.g., MSNBC echoes in Latin feeds, hinder unified OAS responses, as seen in stalled November mediation talks. Critically, such biases stem from economic dependencies. 60% of Latin media revenue ties to U.S. advertisers, per a 2025 Wooler report, incentivizing intervention-friendly narratives. This not only inflames tensions but delegitimizes journalism, with trust at 32% regionally, Reuters Institute. Without reforms like public funding for independence, media becomes a conflict accelerator.
Critique of U.S. policy. U.S. strategy critiques intensify when viewed through distorted media prisms. The drug war pretext masks regime change, as Truthout argued in September 2025, ignoring how sanctions spike trafficking. Unilateralism revives Monroe Doctrine resentments, alienating Petro and risking quagmires like Iraq's $2 trillion cost. Domestically, it diverts from fentanyl crises. Critiques label it psychological warfare. Media distortions abroad amplify these flaws, turning valid Maduro concerns into hawkish consensus. Recommendations: prioritize OAS/UN mediation for monitored Venezuelan elections, easing sanctions on humanitarian grounds. For Colombia, $500 million U.S. aid for refugee infrastructure, modeled on EU-Ukraine pacts. Combat media distortion via Inter-American Press Association fact-check hubs and algorithms curbing disinformation. Congress must enforce war powers via sunset clauses. Long-term, equitable oil deals and anti-poverty pacts address migration routes, fostering stability over coercion.
Conclusion. The Senate vote vaults Venezuela toward peril, with Colombia as ground zero for fallout and media distortions compounding chaos. By critiquing these informational warps, from VTV's emissions to RCN's scares, policymakers can reclaim narrative agency. As Maduro's unbroadcast pleas and Petro's warnings underscore, restraint and truth-telling avert a hemispheric tragedy. In an era of hybrid threats, Latin America's media must evolve from echo to bridge, lest distortion ignites the spark it sensationalizes.